In a previous video on Dan Quisenberry, I had mentioned that he and a few of his Royals teammates died unusually early from brain cancer, and that statistically the odds of it happening to 3 teammates was astoundingly low. The Philadelphia Inquirer noticed something similar with the 1980s Phillies and published this alarming headline. It reads, "Field of Dread. 6 former Phillies died from the same brain cancer. We tested the vet's turf and found dangerous chemicals." In that story, Barbara Laker and David Gambacorta state 6 former Phillies have reportedly died from glioblastoma, an aggressive and deadly form of brain cancer. My friends Sean and David and I did some further research on this topic. First, let's do a quick review of the figurative smoke before we determine whether or not there's an actual fire. The 1980 playoffs feature the Royals and Yankees in the American League and the Phillies and Astros in the National League. 3 of these teams' home fields were AstroTurf. The 1980 World Series was the first Fall Classic appearance for the Royals and the first title for the Phillies. It was the first World Series played entirely on turf. In May of 1987, the 1980 Yankees manager Dick Howser, who would become the Royals manager in 1981, died of brain cancer at age 51. In 1988, Royals pitcher Dan Quisenberry died of brain cancer, age 45. The Royals' Ken Brett died in 2003 of brain cancer, age 55. The Phillies' Tug McGraw and Yankees' Johnny Oates died in 2004, brain cancer. The Phillies' John Vukovich died in 2007, and the Yankees' Bobby Murcer in 2008, brain cancer. These men died of a cancer that affects the general population at a rate of 4.4 per 100,000. The odds of 7 MLB players and coaches who took part in one MLB postseason, all randomly dying of the same rare cancer, are astronomical. So what happened? The Philadelphia Inquirer makes the supposition that the artificial turf is to blame. The newspaper procures samples of the turf from Old Veterans Stadium and had it tested. The test results from Eurofin's Lancaster Laboratories of Environmental Testing found the turf contained 16 different types of PFAS, so-called forever chemicals. As the Inquirer writers say, quote, "The lab findings come at a time of rising alarm across the United States about the pervasiveness of forever chemicals in an array of products, from turf and nonstick cookware to firefighting gear and food packaging. Few of the estimated 12,000 PFAS have been extensively studied. Since experts have only been aware since 2019 that PFAS was an artificial turf, no studies have yet been done to determine whether athletes' exposure could be linked to cancer." Let me give you some insight into what we've learned and then let you form your own opinion. First, let's briefly talk about turf history. In 1966, the first dome stadium, the Astrodome, opened in Houston. Originally, the Astrodome featured a greenhouse ceiling reminiscent of the great train stations of Victorian Europe. This allowed grass to grow inside the dome. But once the Astros outfielders started losing fly balls in the glare, the ceiling was painted. This, of course, killed the grass. For the latter half of that inaugural season, they painted the dead grass while looking for a solution. It was the opening that Monsanto needed. The company gave a presentation to Judge Roy Hofheinz, owner of the Astros, and in the wrap-up cheerfully announced that they were planning to name their revolutionary product AstroTurf. The judge smiled and said it seemed like they answered to his prayers. Then he asked how much the installation of the artificial turf was going to cost him. The Monsanto team quoted him a figure, and again the judge smiled and said, "As it happens, that figure is precisely the same as the one I was planning to charge you for the use of our brand name Astro." After a brief deliberation, Monsanto took the deal. In the years that followed, AstroTurf was installed in stadiums across baseball. By 1980, the Astros, White Sox, Giants, Cardinals, Reds, Pirates, Blue Jays, Twins, Expos, Mariners, Royals, and Phillies all played their home games on artificial turf. I did a patent search starting in the 1960s, and there was a lot of money being poured into research and development of artificial turf. These were brilliant people breaking ground in new areas, companies like 3M, DuPont, Dow Chemical, Union Carbide, and others. They were all actively developing synthetic turf. But the company leading the way, and who ultimately manufactured the turf under the brand name AstroTurf, was Monsanto. My patent search from 1965 to 1975 yielded at least the following highlights from Monsanto. Basically, patents covering the manufacturing of artificial turf, weaving it, fastening it, anchoring it to the ground, and patents for equipment to maintain artificial turf. So what's wrong with artificial turf? As I said, we know that these synthetic turfs contain, quote, forever chemicals. But what are these? Perfluorooctanoic acid, or PFOA, PFOA, and perfluorooctane sulfonate, or PFOS, PFOS, are part of a large group of lab-made chemicals known as perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS or PFAS. Now hold on and stay with me. I know we're not all chemists. This will become more clear in a minute. Just to reiterate, PFAS is a broader term for a group of laboratory-made chemical compounds. These are not found in nature, they are manufactured. There are thousands of chemical compounds that fall under PFAS. PFOA and PFOS are just two of them. PFAS chemical compounds are designed to resist grease, oil, water, and heat. Tests performed on behalf of the Philadelphia Inquirer found 16 polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS, in the samples, including perfluorooctanoic acid, PFOA, and perfluorooctane sulfonic acid, PFOS. The American Cancer Society says studies in animals and humans have linked these chemicals to certain types of cancer, but further research is required to clarify a definitive link. The labs that performed the tests said that the levels present in the turf would be concerning if they were found in drinking water, but less is known about the effects of repeated skin contact with the chemicals. The Inquirer then hypothesized that with the recorded temperatures regularly over 100 degrees during summer games, the turf could have released chemical vapors that were inhaled by players. Could be possible. I'm sure that vapors were released. I'll go as far as to say I know that that's true. I've smelled a turf field in Georgia summers watching my son play travel ball. But whether the outgassing itself is any more carcinogenic than physical contact with the turf just isn't clear. I haven't found any studies on that. The Phillies' official statement is that several brain cancer experts have told the organization that there is no proven link between the turf and brain cancer deaths of the 6 players. From my research, this seems to be true. But pay attention, there is no proven link. There are no studies that prove the causation. That doesn't mean that there isn't one. The CDC's official statement is, quote, more research is needed to assess the human health effects of exposure to PFOA. But while a direct link between PFAS and PFOA exposure and glioblastoma has not been confirmed, researchers only learned that Monsanto-made AstroTurf contained these chemicals in 2019. We need more study, and there is a lot of money that has an interest in not really knowing if there's a link. So if there's studies that need to be done, who's going to pay for these? And consider this, and I hate to tell you this, but I can guarantee you that you have been exposed for years to these chemicals yourself. Do you like pots and pans that don't stick? PFOAs are used in Teflon coatings and probably have been in your cook pots for years. How about clothing that is stain resistant or waterproof? Gore-Tex uses PFOAs. These chemicals have been detected in blood tests in 98% of the U.S. population. What about PFOS? It's even more common. It's a surfactant in one of the main components in Scotchgard fabric protector. It probably exists in every single carpet in every home in the United States today. The same carpet that you lay on to watch TV, the same carpet that our babies are crawling on. Okay, so they are called forever chemicals because they don't break down, but do they stay in our bodies? Well, there are numerous studies pertaining to the half-life of these chemicals in the body. Fish, rats, and monkeys have been studied, and yes, humans. While lab rats tend to process the chemicals in just over a week, and monkeys in about 200 days, the half-life of PFOS, as studied in retired 3M chemical workers, has a mean of 8.67 years. These chemicals do not leave the human body easily. And this is just what's been detected in blood samples. For comparison, the half-life of lead in human blood is about a month, but we also know that the half-life of lead in human bone is 25 plus years. I could not find data on PFOS measurements in human bone. Are we sure that PFOA and other PFAS cause cancer? Researchers use two main types of studies to try and figure out if a substance might cause cancer: studies in the lab and actual human trials. Studies in lab animals absolutely have found exposure to PFOA increases the risk of certain tumors of the liver, testicles, mammary glands, and pancreas. This is without a doubt. As you can imagine, willingly subjecting humans to controlled studies for this is problematic. So researchers have looked at cancer rates in people living near or working in PFOA-related chemical plants. Some of these studies have suggested an increased risk of testicular cancer and kidney cancer with increased PFOA exposure. Studies have also suggested a possible link to thyroid cancer, but the increases in risk have been small and could have been due to chance. Other studies have suggested possible links to other cancers, including prostate, bladder, breast, and ovarian cancer. But not all studies have found such links, and more research is needed to clarify these things. What are the expert agencies saying? In most cases, the American Cancer Society does not determine if something causes cancer. The International Agency for Research on Cancer, the IARC, is part of the World Health Organization. One of its goals is to identify causes of cancer. IARC has classified PFOA as carcinogenic to humans, Group 1, based on sufficient evidence that it can cause cancer in lab animals and strong evidence that it has some of the key properties of a carcinogen in people who are exposed to it. IARC also notes that there is limited evidence in people that PFOA can cause testicular and kidney cancer. IARC has classified PFOS as, quote, possibly carcinogenic to humans, Group 2B. This is based on strong evidence that it has some properties of a carcinogen in people who are exposed to it, and on limited evidence that it can cause cancer in lab animals. IARC also notes there is inadequate evidence that PFOS can cause cancer in people. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency maintains the Integrated Risk Information System, or IRIS, an electronic database that contains information on human health effects from exposure to various substances in the environment. The EPA has not officially classified PFOA as a carcinogen. In a draft, but not final report, the EPA's Scientific Advisory Board examined the evidence on PFOA, mainly from studies in lab animals, and stated that there is, quote, suggestive evidence of carcinogenicity, but not sufficient to assess human carcinogenic potential. Other agencies have not yet formally evaluated whether PFOA can cause cancer. What is being done about PFOA and other PFAS? While the possible long-term health effects of PFAS are being studied, there has been enough concern to phase out the use of some of them. For example, PFOA and some closely related chemicals such as PFOS are now no longer made in the United States, although they are still made in some other countries and could potentially reach U.S. consumers in certain types of products. Another potential concern is that other PFAS are now in use. For example, hexafluoropropylene oxide, or HFPO, is known as a, quote, Gen X chemical. It is often used to replace PFOA in manufacturing processes, while perfluorobutane sulfonic acid, or PFBS, is used as a replacement for PFOS. So manufacturers have just found other chemicals to replace these two. These new chemicals haven't been around long enough for researchers to fully understand if they might have the same or different health effects. I found that Lowe's banned Scotchgard and other sprays that contain these chemicals, and California has made efforts to ban PFOAs. Who is protecting the consumer? That's what I was curious about. You may recognize the name Monsanto. The company has a decades-long history of toxic contamination in manufacturing, including agricultural pesticides, herbicides, asbestos, benzene, the weed killer Roundup, and most infamously, Agent Orange. It would be easy to point the finger at Monsanto given their history. But is that fair? Who is ultimately responsible for testing materials and chemicals for safety? I honestly don't know. To play devil's advocate, these chemical companies that are on the leading edge can't wait decades to perform studies on every product that they create. Their products comply with all legal regulations at the time. So who is protecting us, the consumer? Should that be the Consumer Product Safety Commission? As far as AstroTurf is concerned, the CPSC wasn't formed until 1972, so you can't blame them there. In 1960, the Federal Hazardous Substances Act said, quote, "In determining whether an art material has the potential for producing chronic adverse health effects, including the carcinogenicity and potential carcinogenicity, a toxicologist shall take into account opinions of various regulatory agencies and scientific bodies." That's the quote. So, various regulatory agencies. Who exactly? Again, who is protecting us? Who is responsible for ensuring these chemicals are safe? And if it's nobody, what are we supposed to do? Let's rewind a little bit. So if synthetic turf is this monster, this carcinogenic monster, what about the other teams that played on turf? Do we see similar results? In the 1980s, a large number of Major League Baseball teams went to turf fields, as I said. I went through the entire 1980 roster for every one of these teams, looking at each player. If they were no longer living, I did my best to find out how they died. And if they died of any form of cancer, I made a note. Here's what I found. In the 1980s, these 12 teams were playing on synthetic turf. The Houston Astros, obviously, played on AstroTurf. Vern Rule died at age 55 from multiple myeloma. The White Sox played on Monsanto AstroTurf. Lamar Hoyt died at age 66, unknown cancer. Claudel Washington, age 65, prostate cancer. In the 1980s, the San Francisco Giants played on Monsanto AstroTurf. Vida Blue died at age 73 of cancer. Alan Ripley at age 62 from leukemia, a blood cancer. Rennie Stennett, age 72, cancer, unknown type. The St. Louis Cardinals played in Busch Stadium on Monsanto AstroTurf. Ken Boyer, age 51, lung cancer. Jack Kroll, age 57, cancer. Bobby Bonds, age 57, brain tumor and lung cancer. Pedro Barbon, age 65, cancer. Dave Ricketts, age 73, kidney cancer. The Cincinnati Reds at Riverfront Stadium played on Monsanto AstroTurf. No cancer deaths. Pittsburgh Pirates played on 3M Tartan Turf. Jim Bibby died at age 65 of bone cancer. John Milner, age 50, lung cancer. The Blue Jays in Exhibition Stadium played on a turf of unknown manufacturer. Damaso Garcia. He died at age 63, but he had a brain tumor removed at age 34. Jesse Jefferson, age 62, prostate cancer. Al Woodmar, age 80, colon cancer. The Minnesota Twins in the Metrodome played on Super Turf and then AstroTurf starting in 1987. I found no deaths. The Philadelphia Phillies and Veterans Stadium, as we already said, Tug McGraw, Darren Dalton, John Vukovich, Johnny Oates, and David West all died from brain cancer. And the Royals playing on Monsanto AstroTurf, Dan Quisenberry, Ken Brett, Dick Howser all died of brain cancer. The Montreal Expos played on Monsanto AstroTurf. Scott Sanderson died at age 62 of cancer, Pat Mullen at age 81 of lung cancer, and we all know Gary Carter, age 57, brain cancer. The Seattle Mariners played on Monsanto AstroTurf. Darrell Johnson, age 55, leukemia. Ted Cox, age 65, multiple myeloma. Julio Cruz, age 67, with prostate cancer. And Dave Roberts, 64, lung cancer. So every MLB player in this era would play around 40% of their games on artificial turf, regardless of which team they were on. Those whose home field was artificial may play around 70% of their games on artificial turf, 50% at home, and around 40% on the remaining 50%. So that works out to 70%. You can trust me on the math. If playing on synthetic turf was the reason for the statistical anomaly we see with the Phillies and the Royals, then I would expect to see similarly high brain cancer death rates on these other teams. And empirically, this is just not the case. The deaths from other cancers does not seem to be out of line with the general population. The Phillies and the Royals are quite an outlier. So It does feel like the odds of the 7 men who took part in the 1980 World Series all randomly dying from brain cancer is quite frankly so insanely low that there has to be an underlying cause, doesn't it? I'm convinced that that's the case, but whether or not the synthetic turf is solely to blame, I'm just not so sure. Are these chemicals dangerous? Sure seems that that's the case, but how dangerous? Is anyone studying this? If so, who's funding this study? We don't have to look too far into our past to see how companies like R.J. Reynolds twisted studies and handcrafted data sets to draw conclusions favorable to cigarettes and secondhand smoke. Is it possible that the Phillies and Royals were exposed to something else during that World Series? I'm reminded of something I learned while researching Thurman Munson. When Thurman played in the All-Star Game in 1976, he stayed at the Bellevue Stratford Hotel in Philadelphia. The week after Thurman checked out, the American Legion held a convention at that hotel. Strangely, within days, 182 of the convention attendees developed serious cases of what appeared to be pneumonia. But these cases were not typical pneumonia, and worse, the patients were not responding to antibiotics. Within a couple weeks, patients started dying, and within a month, 29 of them were dead. The CDC came in and started an investigation. What did these legionnaires all have in common? How did so many of them get sick, and why wasn't the pneumonia responding to standard treatment? The CDC spent a year combing through the hotel. They looked at the cadmium content in the water pitchers used in the hotel. They sampled the carpets, the wallpaper, the elevators, looking for toxic compounds. They totally dismantled rooms and tested everything. Finally, a researcher discovered an unknown bacteria in samples taken from deceased patients. The CDC then suspected leaky refrigeration units in the hotel basement. But that wasn't it. It wasn't until another outbreak in 1977 that the CDC discovered bacteria growing in the large water cooling towers of the hotel. The bacteria was being spread via the air conditioning system throughout the whole hotel. It was determined that a unique temperature inversion in Philadelphia on July 23 of 1976, and then again in 1977, produced an acutely heating ambient temperature which set in motion a rapid cooling of warm air by the hotel's water tower. The bacteria growing inside the water tower was then aerosolized and dispersed through the hotel's ventilation system. This became known as Legionnaire's disease, and there continue to be outbreaks today despite increased awareness of the importance of inspecting water towers. My point is how extremely difficult epidemiology can be. And that was with the CDC on site for almost a year doing investigative work. We don't know what happened to the men who played in the 1980 World Series. Was it the turf? Were they all somehow collectively exposed to something else? I don't know. Given that it's been 44 years, I'm not sure we're ever going to know. What do you think? What conclusions do you draw from what I've shared? Please leave a comment and tell me. I know I have some really intelligent people following me on YouTube, including medical doctors. I welcome your responses. Thanks again to David Reed, Sean Kelly. Thank you. Take care.